Welcome to the Legacy Project. We're glad you're a part of this adventure, learning about the lives and experiences of people, very interesting people I've had the opportunity of meeting and working with. And today we're talking with Nikole Nelson, who is the director. Is that your official title, Nikole?
I'm the CEO.
They're
Yeah.
CEO, Chief Executive Officer of Frontline Justice, an organization that's working to put community justice workers in our communities across the country. And community justice workers, as I've come to understand it, is based in some part by a long tradition of community health workers working in local communities. But the community justice workers, and Nikole will explain some of that as we get into the podcast. But right now we want to get to know her. Nikole, where are you from?
Yeah. Oh, hi, James. Um, yeah, so it's good to meet you, or good to be here with you
Mhm.
today. Yeah, so I am from Magna, Utah. I grew up in Magna, Utah.
Mhm. And where did you go to school? Did
I went to Cypress High School.
Cypress High
Um,
School?
Cypress High School is my high school. I guess I'm
Uh-huh.
assuming you meant high school, but elementary school, Lake Ridge Elementary, Brockbank Junior High. I went to University of Utah as an undergrad, and then Willamette University for law school.
Great.
Mhm.
So you no longer live in Utah, though. Is that correct?
That's correct. I go back and forth between Anchorage, Alaska, which is my home base, and New York City.
That's quite a contrast.
It is.
That's quite.
Yes.
Yeah. Are the offices for Frontline Justice located in New York or in Anchorage or?
Yeah, so we're a national initiative, and we have our folks, our team are all across the nation. So we have folks that are in North Carolina, Texas, Arizona, New York,
Mhm.
Anchorage, where I am, and DC.
Great. So, Nikole, you're doing interesting work. What are some of the influences in your life that have shaped who you are and the values that you possess that would take you into this kind of work?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I grew up in Magna, Utah, and I am a first generation college grad, and I was raised by my mom and my stepdad for the most part in Magna, and they were my stepdad, my dad was came from a big family, a very capable and funny and incredible sheet metal workers and cowboys.
Mhm.
And on my mom's side, I had a really loving family there too, who were very capable and creative and doing lots of really interesting things. But again, had not gone to, most of which had not gone to school past the high school, had not gone past school to high school. And so in the community that I was raised, there were so many great things happening, but people did not have higher education, this piece of it. And there were also lots of, I saw a lot of people within our community who didn't have access to basic things that you might need, that people needed. And one of the foundational things that happened when I was growing up, Magna was a mining community. There's a big copper mine out there, and the copper mine went under during the time that I was going to school, and a lot of people in my community lost their jobs then, and the wage earners lost their jobs. And that was that was a traumatic thing that happened within our community. And so I felt like from an early age that there's just like a lot of injustice happening in the world, and that there were they're very capable, proud people who had lots to offer in the world, but were not being able to access it for reasons that didn't feel particularly fair to me. And so I think I had just this like ingrained sense of injustice from a very young age, and wanted to try to do something to make things right.
What specifically, I mean, in terms of that experience growing up as a child in a community basically shutting down for the most part because of an industry collapsing, what were the conversations like with your family?
I don't think it was so much conversations with my family. We were protected in some sense because my cousins and uncles and aunts were not working at the mine. My grandpa had not really
Hmm.
set that out as a path for his kids. So they were sheet metal workers, but it was like it was in the ether of what you saw happening at school. Like you could feel the stress in families whose dads didn't have jobs then and who had them before. And it felt like it just sort of there was all this tension and stress and worry that I felt as a child moving forward. And I think one other thing that sort of happened that was fundamental to me too, um, this I remember this the other day. There was a radio station at the time that made fun of our community. And so there was, a big sense of um being excluded and so there was like a whole radio station that made fun of Magna and there were Magna girls and what that was and sort of living with this idea of like yeah that you weren't
Hmm.
welcome, I guess, or that there was something wrong with you for the based on the
Yeah.
place that you lived.
So, who are the influences that kind of instilled in you the values that one, you saw the injustice and understood it as an injustice, and then wanted to do something about it? Where were some of the influences that helped shape that?
Yeah, so I really think I give a lot of credit to that to my stepdad, who it was very much like he would tell me all the time, you can do anything you want. And yeah, and sort of didn't know how to create the path for me to do something, to create that path, but was very much instilled that what was happening was not okay and it wasn't and that you could do something about it if you wanted to, that you had the skill set and opportunity if you could people could empower themselves and change their circumstances and you should strive for that. um and then I also think on my mom's side, my grandma there was like very logical and very she was very specific about understanding like you need to read things, you need to do this piece of it, and thinking about how you could. So I think from both sides of my family, I really had a strong sense of you could change your circumstances. That was possible.
Teachers, were they in kind of influence?
I think I mean I had good teachers and I like
Mhm.
them, I think but I would say more so my peer group
Mhm.
really really stood struck me or really influenced the way that I was thinking about things. I had the good fortune of having friends who were like really curious about the world around and trying to figure out different ways to change what was happening and had that sense of it. And then by the time I got to college, I do remember there was one teacher when I was in college who he was a had been a public defender. And this was the first time I really met anybody who had been to law school. So I learned through this process that there were lawyers who could do things that were doing things to representing people whose were underrepresented. And he had been a public defender and also a labor union organizer and represented union organizers. I'm like, oh yes, this is a really amazing work. And I understood that you could use like a law degree in a way that could help people do achieve their rights.
Well, it shouldn't be lost on us that today is May 1st, the International Workers' Day globally. We celebrate Labor Day here in September, but globally, today is the day where organized labor is celebrated.
Yeah.
So, and being a former union organizer, I'm very sensitive to that. So, uh,
Yeah.
so what made you decide to go to law school?
Yeah, so I always sort of had this notion that I would go to law school. So right I honestly, this is kind of funny, but I wanted to, I originally when I was like in fourth grade or something, I really wanted to be a private detective because I really loved Magnum PI and really thought that was like the greatest thing that could happen. And then my dad said, maybe you should be a lawyer instead. They do basically the same thing, and also you are really argumentative. And so again, I latched onto that and decided I was going to go to law school and really wanted to do that. And then again, once I was in undergrad, I was inspired by the lawyer that I met there, who was a public defender and whatnot. And he was so passionate about his work. I'm like, I want to do that. I want to do something public interesty. And so I went to law school, not knowing what that meant exactly, but thinking that I wanted to do that to help people and solve puzzles and, do that kind of thing. And then I ended up in law school and really, again, meeting groups of people who I had one of my professors, Carlton Snow, who had been a labor arbitrator.
Hmm.
But he'd been raised in Appalachia and we really connected around sort of some similar things in our backgrounds. And he really took me under his wing. And he was really inspirational to me.
Good. So we're talking to Nikole Nelson, the Chief Executive Officer of Frontline Justice, um, really placing community justice workers in communities around the country. Uh, the Community Justice Worker Program, how did you make the segue from law school into, you're the founder of Frontline Justice. What motivated you, or what brought to your attention the need for community justice workers?
Yeah, and so maybe I'll step back for just a second and explain what justice workers are and what Frontline
Yeah.
Justice does. So, Frontline Justice is a national organization that's empowering people who aren't lawyers to be able to provide simple legal help to people who need it. And so, a couple of things to know about that. First off, Americans experience like a huge number of unmet civil legal needs at any given year. So that's like 150 to 250 million civil legal needs. 120 million of those go unmet because people can't access or afford an attorney. And these rights are really important. The things that people lose out on because they can't access the law are things like they get evicted from their homes, they get evicted, they lose their health care, they can't access the education supports that they're entitled to, or the food or health care. And there are rights that would protect them, but they go unenforced because people don't have access to lawyers and they don't know what the law is. So that's what Frontline Justice does. We clear space so that justice workers who are everyday people who have been trained with some specific support to be able to provide that legal support within their community. And how I got to this place really came after law school. After law school, I had the good fortune of being recruited for a job in Alaska at a legal aid organization. In legal aid organization, I was providing free civil legal help to people who couldn't afford it. And I worked there for 25 years. Much of the work that I was doing in during this 25-year period was across all of Alaska. Many parts of Alaska are what people will call legal deserts. So there are no lawyers. There are places that are off the road system. And most of those places that are off the road system in Alaska are mostly Alaska Native or Indigenous.
Mm.
So for 25 years, I was a staff attorney, a supervising attorney, and then the longtime executive director of this legal aid program. And during the course of that 25 years, people were coming to our door in huge numbers trying to get help, and we were always under-resourced to provide the help that we needed. And so we ended up having to turn people away one for one. And that didn't even take into account those who didn't know that they could come to our door to get the assistance. And this was heartbreaking for me, particularly in communities like Alaska, where there are very few degrees of separation between you and everyone else in the community. So when I had to turn people away because we didn't have enough resources to help people, it meant you would see them, the after effects trickle out in school. They may be folks that we couldn't help that my daughter was going to school with, or you would see it trickle out. And that was really hard for me. So I try as I might, I was trying to raise more money, to provide more legal help, to recruit more lawyers, and can never really get on top of this problem. So during this time, I want to say it was back in around 2012, something like that. Our community came together under the guidance of our Supreme Court to see, in recognition that this lawyer-centric way that we have been trying to address legal help in our community just wasn't working. And what could we do to try to transform the service delivery into something that was more that had better capacity to meet community need? Long story short, when our Supreme Court developed a task force, and we invited people who weren't lawyers and weren't part of the legal system, but other folks who were really interested, that were feeling the after effects of the fact that people couldn't get legal help. So maybe it's the housing shelters, maybe it's a domestic violence shelter or something like that, or a healthcare provider who were feeling the impacts of unmet legal needs. And we came together and said, hey, how can we start solving these problems collectively? So I ended up, one person who was on that task force was from the tribally operated healthcare system. And we're like, hey, why don't we band together? Because these problems are impacting people's health when people can't get legal help. And so we decided to build a medical legal partnership.
Hmm.
And through that medical legal partnership, it was transformative because I started learning about how the healthcare system was like 40 years ahead of the legal system, and thinking about how it could increase and expand access to healthcare services. So we ended up then developing a I learned that our healthcare from our friends in the healthcare system about community health workers. And I thought, oh my gosh, why aren't we doing this in the justice space? Why isn't there something that, again, is training up people who haven't gone to law school to provide some very simple legal help to better distribute legal help? And so this took off like wildfire.
Hmm.
And we ended up within a short period of time recruiting and training community justice workers throughout much of Alaska, over 200, some of which were off the road system. And they were able to provide help to people who otherwise weren't accessing it. And so based on that work, I ended up, and then again, was brought on to lead the national initiative to address similar problems across the nation.
So, how many states are you currently in working in?
Yeah, so right now there are 14 jurisdictions and the District of Columbia which have authorized justice workers to do work within their state, and there are another 20 that are in the works.
Hmm. That's great. So, uh, I get the impression that you focus mostly on civil issues. Why not criminal as well?
Yeah, so in criminal cases, you have a right to an attorney. So if you
Mhm.
can't afford one. And so people might know that if that's part of your Miranda rights. So if you are accused of a crime, you're entitled to a court-appointed attorney if you can't get one. And so that's the reason that we don't focus on that, because you do have a right to an attorney in those cases.
And in civil
What
cases, you don't.
You do not. You do not.
Huh.
And so that's why legal services, legal aid organizations are underfunded in a way that public defenders are not. Although I would say the public defense system is also short funded, but legal aid organizations are even more so short funded.
So, how do attorneys feel about this program?
Yeah, Yeah, so that's a good question. I think once they understand the program and understand what we're trying to do, that many attorneys get on board with it.
Mhm.
Once they understand that really what we're trying to address are the unmet civil legal needs that people don't have access to attorneys for. And once they understand the evidence, I think there's widespread support.
Mhm.
Having said that, before, without looking at the evidence, sometimes they'll be concerned about it, right?
Mhm.
So some of those concerns are around protectionism, lawyers wanting to make sure that they are protecting their income streams. But the work that we're doing really here, nobody, it's kind of funny. I talk about this sometimes, like, yeah, somebody's worried they're going to eat your lunch, but there's no lunch to be had here.
Mhm.
Like the folks that on the issues that we're providing help to, people don't have resources to pay for an attorney and they're priced out on the market. In addition to that, there
Mhm.
simply aren't attorneys that are practicing in these areas because, again, there's not a financial incentive to do so. So they're not going to be able to make a living practicing in these particular areas because people can't pay you to provide these services. And the inability to pay, like not having our the ability to enforce your rights under the law is something that should just exist in a democracy.
Right.
And so we shouldn't have a paywall on access to protection of the law.
Mm.
And we do right now.
So, uh, under the civil uh, aspect of the law, what kinds of cases are most adjudicated or addressed by a community justice worker?
Sure. So it can be in a wide range of cases. Things that come up most often that people need help with, it might be like evictions, maybe evictions or other things related to housing, foreclosures, debt collection, again, access to public benefits like SNAP benefits or Medicaid, appealing a denial of health care or medical debt. Also, there's a lot of um, so like family law issues can come up quite often. So people might need help adjusting child support, or they might need custody of their kids, or they might need a domestic violence protective order, something like that. Also, oftentimes grandparents might be taking care of their grandchildren and they might need some just documents to be able to help get that child enrolled in school or to get the health care that they need. So there's a wide range.
Out of curiosity, because I don't know what it is, if it's civil or criminal or immigration law. Do you provide assistance in that space?
Yeah, so immigration is an area where their community justice workers could be very effective, and
Mhm.
that's a civil issue, and people aren't entitled to an attorney in those cases. And again, it's very complicated, and the consequences of not getting good legal help are really extreme, right? So you could be deported, um, so there are high consequences to not knowing what your rights are, and also you don't have the right to an attorney in those spaces. So that is one area. Also, I would say too, one thing that's interesting, even though if you're accused of a crime, right, you have a right to an attorney, but there are a lot of civil issues that are adjacent to the criminal system that are actually civil. So, for instance, if you get out of you're released after you come out of the justice system. If you have a right to have your records expunged after a short period of time, that's a civil issue. It's not a criminal issue. So that's something that people could help with. Or maybe you need your driver's license restored, or you know, I'm trying to think too. Also, sometimes when if you are incarcerated, you still have there might be civil issues that exist relating to the conditions of your incarceration. And those are civil issues, not criminal, and you don't have a right to an attorney there. Also, you may be trying to take care of some custody matters or child support or things like that while you're incarcerated, and those two are civil issues, even though they're sort of related to the criminal system because you might be incarcerated.
How long have you been doing this?
So this is my third year. Yes.
Third year. So, do you have a story or an illustration of someone that a community justice worker has helped, or the community justice worker themselves, that sort of validates your impulse to do this work?
Yeah, so the thing I'll tell you, one of the biggest, I mean, there are like a number of stories I could tell you, but the one that really sort of was the impetus for me and that stuck with me and made me realize that of all the things I was trying as an executive director of this Alaska Legal Services at the time, that this was something that was game changing and had the potential to actually scale and transform the way that we were doing things. And that was our community. So I want to say this is about 2019, 2020, started experiencing a crisis in SNAP benefits. So our state stopped processing applications for SNAP
Mm.
altogether. And so we were hearing this from our rural communities that people weren't getting them, that there were delays, and that people were going hungry. And so we developed training programs, and we didn't know if they would work or not, but we ended developing training programs that told people what their rights were, that they had the right to have their applications processed within a certain period of time, and also how to appeal that if it didn't happen, how you would resolve that issue if in fact your application wasn't being acted upon. So fast forward a few years later, those training modules were really, there was a great uptake on them because people were experiencing this crisis and they were very effective at drawing down services. So we ended up, there's research out around this that showed that the justice workers in Alaska were able to draw down $23 million in SNAP benefits that otherwise would not have been distributed. And the distribution went into rural communities that otherwise would not have gotten the help. So that's like the big picture thing, like it was
Yeah.
very successful. But in my mind, one person really sticks in my head when I think about this impact. There's a small tribe in Seward, Alaska, and Dolly, who is the tribal administrator for the Katuchik tribe, this is a small organization. They have 5 employees, and she had all 5 of her employees, which are the go-to people for folks in that community. They're providing senior benefits, and there's showers. They're growing greens for seniors. They're really like the go-to people who are supporting people within their community. And so she had all of her employees taking the training modules to help them understand how to process their SNAP benefits. So when I was talking with her afterwards, I asked her, I'm like, what's the biggest takeaway for this? Why did you dedicate? I mean, you guys have so many things that you're doing right now. Why was this top of the list when you've got so much going on? And she said, people are already coming to us for this help already because they're struggling. And now we know that we're doing it right.
Mm.
And we know we are doing the right thing within our community. And it has really helped us and empowered us to know that we can make a difference. There were training programs around wills
Yeah.
for folks. And within the period of time, after taking the training programs and working in the community justice worker model with Alaska Legal Services, within a short period of time, all of the seniors within that community, within the tribe community, had a will at the end of it. So again, it was really transformational. It was increasing
Yeah.
community capacity to help each other. And I thought, like, this is really what we want people to do,
Yeah.
to empower the trusted helpers.
That's fantastic, Nicole. I'm sure the impact that it has in individual lives and communities to have access to that kind of resource, it's got to be a game changer in so many different ways. We're talking with Nikole Nelson, the Chief Executive Officer of Frontline Justice. Nicole, do you have a family?
I
Children?
do. Yeah. So I have a daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then she has 2 older siblings from her dad's first marriage that are in my orbit as well.
Hmm.
I
So
have a mom. I mean, I guess. Yeah.
yeah. How old is your daughter?
She is 22.
Stephen Covey, in his book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, the second habit, he talks about living with the end in mind. And he
Mm.
says, imagine people attending your funeral today. What would people say about you? And if you had the chance to plan what you would like people to say about you 10 years from now, what would you like people to say? So, my question to you
Mm.
is, when people think of Nikole Nelson and what she has created, not only in the Frontline Justice Network, but in your life, period, what would you like people to say about you?
Hmm. Um, well, I think I would not want them to say that I created anything. I would want them to think that I was a part of something,
Mm-hmm.
that I was, um, so I think that would be important to me, that I was part of a community that was trying to build something meaningful. I would want that. Um, and I guess I would want to, like, I guess for people to think that, I would want people to think that I believed in the best possible opportunity for everyone, that there was something within everyone and that we were capable, that there was a way to bring out the best in each of us.
Mm-hmm.
And that people, and I think the belief that if you move with trust and care, that there's a way to bring people that they feel secure enough that they can be their best possible selves.
Mm-hmm. And you would be a part of that, of
I would
making,
like that.
yeah, you would like that. So I ask a question every guest on the Legacy Project. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Leap Year with Amy Adams.
Mm,
She is on her way to meet her fiance and in Ireland, and she goes through a number of calamities, etc. But she meets an Irish bartender who kind of diverts her attention. But he asked the question when she was sorting through her values. He said, if your house is on fire, what is the one thing you would grab? It couldn't be people, it can't be pets, it can't be your computer where you store all your information. But what is
mm,
one thing in your house that you value that's so important to you that you would want to grab it?
hmm.
I'll give you a second to think about it. My father left me my father's a World War II veteran, and he left me a Corman's box, which had medical equipment in it. He was wounded during the Second World War, and he gave me that box, and I store all kinds of stuff in there. My admissions to Harvard, my admissions to a lock of hair from my girlfriend when I was 15 years old. And I mean, I have all kinds of stuff in there that's just symbolic. I would probably grab that because it would be a connection to my past. It doesn't have to be that, but I use that as an example. What
Yeah.
kind of thing would you grab?
I think I would grab so yes, there's a little book. It's like a Toots and Puddle book, which
Mm-hmm.
is this they're these cute little pigs that write to each other, and it's a children's book. And I would read it to my daughter when she was little growing up. But recently, so it reminds me of that and her childhood, but also inside it is a note that she had written when she was first learning to write, that's from my dad, like asked her to write it. And so in it, it says, Nick, I love you. This, and then my daughter, Nayama, says, this is from Pops, not me. And so it's like this like very cute thing that
Yeah.
reminds me of, you know, the circle of all the things that I love, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
right in that moment, if I'm forced to choose, I guess.
Last question. What's the legacy you want to leave?
Oh, geez. I struggle so much with that idea of legacy because I'm not quite sure. I would like to have just a lot of like love and joy behind, I guess, if that's like one piece of it, and not much more. I'm not sure what else we as humans can put out there and leave behind in the world, honestly.
I don't do this normally, but I would just coming out of the context of this interview and various conversations we've had over the past year, I would say that your commitment to this process and the establishment and making community justice workers available in community and the way you've approached it. I love the phrase frontline justice because that's puts it in the streets. But you approach this with a sense of humility and character that deflects from you and focuses on the mission, and which is both good and bad, I suppose. It's good in that it deflects to the mission, but you are such a talented, creative, imaginative person that we should be celebrating the legacy you're creating and the legacy you're sharing with all the community justice workers, your family, and others who are impacted. Because today there are people in communities around the country that are getting legal aid and assistance that would not otherwise get it had you not had this vision and built this vision with your friends and your colleagues. And I thank you for that. So,
That's very kind.
we've been talking with Nikole Nelson, the Chief Executive Officer of Frontline Justice. And what's your website? It's
Yeah, it's frontlinejustice.org.
frontlinejustice.org. If you're interested in learning about community justice workers, even becoming a community justice worker, go to that website. Reach out to Nikole. Thanks for being a part of the Legacy Project, Nikole.
Thank you.
To find out more information about this conversation and other Legacy podcast episodes, go to servantforge.org. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app and consider leaving us a review. The podcast was produced by Matt Erickson, music by David Hyde. Please look for a new episode on our podcast coming out soon. Remember, you have inherited a great legacy. You have an opportunity to create a great legacy. Engage your past to build your future.